From the golden age of Hollywood to the midnight movies of the drive-in era, some filmmakers chase greatness while others, well, trip over it on the way there. I'm Jim Juno, and this is Lights Camera Author. And today we're talking about a man long hailed, perhaps unfairly, as the worst director of all time. But what if he wasn't? What if Ed Wood, the man behind such classics as Plan 9 from Outer Space and Glenn or Glenda, was actually one of America's great outsider artists, a filmmaker whose failures revealed something essential about creativity itself? That's the argument at the heart of Will Sloan's new book, Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. A sharp, funny, surprisingly tender look at the most infamous auteur of the movie world. Will, thanks for joining me on Light Camera Author.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, as you were saying that, I was remembering that I remember when I had the pitch meeting to, sell this book. At one point they asked me, "Are you going to try to claim him as a good filmmaker actually?" And I thought, God, it's weird that I haven't answered that question to myself yet. And I remember saying, "Well, I think he's not merely bad." And that ended up, I guess, being the sort of guiding principle for the book going forward.
Well, let me ask you, when you write the title, the director of all time, well, let me ask you first, what made you take on Ed Wood? I mean, not as a punchline, but as a serious subject.
Well, a lot of reasons. I first started thinking about doing this book probably like 5 or 6 years ago, and it sort of came to me because if I watched an Ed Wood movie with someone, I would just talk over the movie, and I would just because like if you watch an Ed Wood movie, every single person on screen has some incredible story associated with them. And I thought, God, I would love to spend time in this world. I would love to write a sort of modest critical study about this filmmaker along the lines of what somebody might write about David Lynch or something like that. But also, I guess the other big reason was there's been a lot of, or there have been a lot of discoveries in Ed Wood's corpus over the last 20 years or so, certainly since the Tim Burton biopic. There have been a lot
Mhm.
of films that were lost or were underseen that have sort of been revived or in some cases completely rediscovered. There are all of his novels, which he wrote over 50 novels and dozens, hundreds of short stories and articles, which are more accessible now than they've ever been. And I think when you take all of this material, it doesn't necessarily save him, but I think it complicates or creates a different picture of exactly what kind of bad filmmaker he was.
That's true. And let me ask you, when you first encountered Ed Wood's films, was your reaction laughter or fascination or both?
Well, I'm afraid to say it was 100% laughter because
Yeah.
I was I was a kid when I first saw the Ed Wood movies, and I think when you're a kid, or at least when I was a kid, I had no taste in particular. I had no critical faculties. I liked virtually any movie I ever saw. And so when it was put to me that Plan 9 from Outer Space was the worst movie of all time, I went in very primed to laugh at it because how often do you get to experience any kind of power as a child? So, when I was 7 or whatever, and you show me a flying saucer on a string or a cardboard tombstone that falls over, it's like, yes, I can identify that as bad. There's no complicated ideological questions here. There's no you don't have to master the nuances of film art and storytelling. You can say that that's bad. But definitely, I mean, learning more about Ed Wood, and that first viewing never left me. Learning more about him, learning more about his world, definitely gave me a deep fascination for him that continued basically all my life.
A lot of people first found out about Ed Wood from a movie that is no longer out. I guess you can find it on YouTube. It was called It Came from Hollywood. It
Oh,
had a lot of
yeah.
Saturday Night Live people in there. Um, and then also the Medved's book, uh, the Golden Turkey Awards, or 50 worst movies ever made. Before the Johnny Depp movie.
That's
Was that your
absolutely right. I mean, the Medveds, they had the book The 50 Worst Films of All Time in 1978, which did not include Plan 9 from Outer Space. It included no reference to Ed Wood. But by that time, a sort of underground following for these movies had been bubbling up just because they were on TV constantly. They were cheap movies to show. And so the Medveds, well, at the end of the 50 Worst Films of All Time, there's a ballot that if you bought the book back then, you could fill it in your choice for the worst movie of all time. And
Hmm.
enough people filled that out and they mailed their ballots into the Medveds that 2 years later, in the Golden Turkey Awards, the winner was Plan 9 from Outer Space, which the Medveds were very surprised by because I think the second place winner was Exorcist 2, The Heretic, which was just like the big flop of that time. It was so notorious at that time. So for a low budget sci-fi horror movie from 20 years earlier to beat the big flop of the time said something about the underground following that it had built. But I'm glad you mentioned it came from Hollywood because that's become kind of a forgotten movie, a sort of like that's entertainment for uh, bad movies,
For
quote
bad
unquote.
movies, yes.
Yeah, which I think the Medveds were involved in that. They were consultants, but they later disowned it. They thought it
Hmm.
was bad. And I mean, it's a movie that doesn't have a particularly good reputation, I guess because it had like Dan Aykroyd and Gilda Radner and Cheech and Chong doing kind of proto mystery science theater commentary over the
John
movies.
Candy, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. He was in it. And now, one of the most striking ideas in your book, again, I'm gonna mention the title because I want people to realize it's Ed Wood Made in Hollywood, USA. But one of your striking ideas is that Wood's badness is almost a form of sincerity. I mean, he wanted his movies to move us, but they can't. They just don't.
Well,
What do you
yeah.
think do you think his lack of polish actually reveals, what does it reveal about him as an artist?
Well, I think the locus of taking Ed Wood seriously as an artist is Glen or Glenda, which is the film he made in 1953. It was his first feature-length directorial effort. The backstory of that movie was Christine Jorgensen was the first widely publicized case of a gender affirmation surgery. And this really cheap producer named George Weiss was going to do a cash-in movie called I Changed My Sex. And Ed Wood went to his office and said, I am the most qualified person in Hollywood to make this movie because I've lived it. And that did not impress George Weiss. But what impressed George Weiss was that Ed Wood knew Bela Lugosi. And it's like, okay, you can get me a star for cheap. I'll let you make the movie. But instead of making a movie about Christine Jorgensen, really, Ed Wood made a movie about himself because he was at that time an in the closet cross dresser. He became much more open about being a cross dresser as time went on. He hid this from his girlfriend. And then he made this movie where he himself stars as Glenn or Glenda. His girlfriend stars as his girlfriend in the movie. And the movie is all about his struggle coming out to her. And the movie is sort of 50% this, classical roadshow exploitation kind of movie where you've got a cop and a doctor who are saying, well, a sex change is defined as this, and society needs to consider what a sex change means, and all that kind of pseudo educational stuff. And then the other half of it is just this like confessional, it's got this the centerpiece scene of the movie is this dream ballet basically where Ed Wood
Right.
is
Hmm.
imagining the world laughing at him for coming out. And the movie is, I mean, it's frankly a mess. It's a movie that doesn't fully know what it's saying about the subjects it raises. It's kind of contradicting itself. It's sort
Hmm.
of half progressive, half reactionary. But I think in those flaws, you get a movie that's very human. I've talked to a lot of transgender critics and writers who have sort of gravitated towards this movie over the years because they think it's a movie about kind of being in the closet. It's an expression of that feeling. And I think that this movie, the threads that are introduced in it, you can see Ed tugging at them, 20 years
Hmm.
later. You can see the same artistic personality that made this movie is present in, I don't know, a book that he wrote like Diary of a Transvestite Hooker or Killer in
Mhm.
Drag. And the fact that the movie's very flawed, the fact that those books are what they are, that's interesting to me. The fact that he's not like, I think he has the soul of an artist, but sometimes his technique is lacking.
Mhm. Was this Glenn or Glenda? No, I'll be honest, I haven't seen the movie yet. I've been trying to find it. Um, it's not easily found,
Well, I think
even
if you
online.
look on YouTube, maybe it might be there. But yeah, they're definitely his movies are scattered to the winds. It's true.
Yeah, but the Glenn or Glenda was, and with Bela Lugosi, was that the one where he was like there was buffaloes running and running, and he was yelling things like "pull the string" or something like that?
Yeah,
Is
you
that the
you
movie?
got it. Yeah,
Is that
I mean,
right?
Glenn or Glenda has like several layers of narration where the main story is about Glenn, and then it's framed by a doctor and a cop sort of talking about what it means to be a cross-dresser or a transgender person. And then above them, there's Bela Lugosi as the puppet master. I think he's credited as scientist, and I guess he's God basically. And how does he fit in the movie? Well, it's the Bela Lugosi was available, and Ed had, you know, he had him for a day, and he found something for him to do, and that's one of Ed's core artistic strategies, I think. If it's available, use it.
Well, now, do you think Plan 9 from Outer Space or, Glenn or Glenda, they might actually function better if we stop judging them as failures and start watching them as, I don't know, say experiments?
I think so. I mean, Glen or Glenda is definitely an experimental film in the strict definition of the term, in that it's an experiment. I find his movies most rewarding as, yeah, just strange expressions from a strange guy. I think if you think about them too much as bad movies or the worst movie of all time, it creates a burden of expectation, creates a burden of, oh, you got to laugh at this. You're going to laugh at everything that happens. First of all, I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit. He was a well-meaning guy trying to express himself, and I think there's something to that. But beyond that, I think if you approach them as strange movies, they open up a little bit more. Yeah, you come at them with a bit of a generosity of spirit and be more receptive to the kind of weird things Ed's trying to do.
Well, when you tell people I've written a book about Ed Wood, what's their reaction? Is kind of like, oh my gosh, these movies were awful, or do they laugh, or what's the reaction?
Well, usually they smile. I think people feel fondly towards Ed. I feel like, over the years, a lot of people have seen the Tim Burton movie. So people have
Mhm.
a general sense of like what he was about, who he was. And I think, yeah, I mean, I've been kind of overwhelmed. I think everyone I've talked to, people have been generally receptive to the idea because, I think his worthiness as a subject kind of speaks for itself. He was a very personal artist who had a long career, who, his career was very subterranean and he was constantly finding ways to insert his strange personality. And
Mhm.
I think. I think just the fact that he was an artist is enough. I think I've definitely, in talking to people, people have been curious. They're willing to hear me out.
Now, he touched a lot well, looking back now, it's remarkable how he touched subjects that Hollywood normally wouldn't touch at the time. Do you think he understood how radical that was, or was he just telling his story the only way he could?
Possibly he understood how radical it was. Glenn or Glenda, in particular, one of the things I found is this remarkable letter that he wrote to a magazine called Letters from Female Impersonators in, I think, the year
Mhm.
1961. And it was a letter written by Shirley. It was signed by Shirley, and that was his drag name. And there are pictures that are included with the letter of Ed in drag. It's very clearly him. And the letter is writing about, his life as a crossdresser, basically. And towards the end, he says something like, "Oh, and then I starred in the famous film about cross-dressing, Glen or Glenda, also known as I Changed My Sex. And reading that, I was kind of blown away because I thought, oh, he in 1961 he recognized or he saw that movie as an important film for like cross-dressing representation. Basically, he took pride in that, and he wanted to share that information. So I think he probably did realize, at least at certain times, that what he was doing was radical. That said, it can't be underestimated that I think he really did want to become like a popular, famous director. He wanted to make movies that, he wanted to ascend the ranks of the studio system. He wanted to make blockbuster films, and he failed at that goal. So, um, yeah, would definitely, I think, settle for being a radical, but I think his ultimate aim was to integrate into the system.
Hmm. But now in 1994, you mentioned the Tim Burton film, and how has that film, has it helped or has it hindered the public's understanding of the real Ed Wood?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's helped because I think it's made it much easier to explain to people what this book is. People,
Hmm.
more people know who he is. I feel like more people are fond towards Ed Wood because of that movie. Uh, people's perception of him is very much set by the Johnny Depp performance in that movie, which is so likable.
Hmm.
Um, I, I mean, yeah, I love that movie. I think it's delightful. I wouldn't be writing the book if I didn't think there was more to say. I mean, the movie has a very self-imposed limitation on what kind of story it's going to tell, how far in the story it's going to tell. It ends with Ed Wood in this moment of triumph with the premiere of Plan 9 from Outer Space, and it very consciously doesn't get into the rest of his life. And I feel like if there's a selling point of this book or one of them, it might be to try to sell people on what happened after that.
True. And now, if he was alive today, how do you think he'd fit into the world of YouTube or streaming or do-it-yourself cinema?
Well, he was a relentless creator. He was constantly creating. He had his typewriter, and all hours of the day, he was making scripts. He was writing books. He always had projects on the go, even though after 1960, he never really got a mainstream movie off the ground ever again. He was always planning something. He always wanted to do something. So yeah, I think he would be thrilled with the sheer number of options that are available now. He would definitely, be making something on his camcorder. What I'm really camcorder, what a dated terminology that I just used. the, the heck was that? No, he'd be
For
using
you kids
his
out there, a camcorder was something which was about the size of a building, and people would videotape it. And for videotape, you have to look it up on the Google. Okay, so
camcorder is what I made my little movies on when I was a kid. He'd be using a cell phone now. He'd be on TikTok with the Zoomers. But yeah, I mean, the thing that gets me really curious is what he would have made of this worst director of all time phenomenon. I mean, things would have been quite different. I mean, there probably would be no Tim Burton movie if he had been alive to defend himself, Maybe he would have embraced it. He seems like he was a proud man, but maybe he would have hit the convention circuit. He definitely seemed like he was
Oh yeah.
uh, desperate for some kind of validation, desperate for some kind of attention. And once he got over the initial blow to his ego, maybe he would have found a way to cultivate that reputation into something. It's too bad. We'll never know.
Yeah. Now Ed Wood, I mean, did he ever consider himself a failure? Because in the movie, he always seemed optimistic.
I think, I mean, I'm diagnosing him here, but I think he was
Hmm.
probably bipolar. Definitely, when he was getting evicted from his last apartment, and he was homeless, I think it's pretty hard to not consider yourself a failure at that point. But then I also read that, he spent the last 3 days of his life at a friend's apartment, a friend who he wanted to play Bela Lugosi in this biopic that he was planning. He wanted to make a Bela Lugosi biopic, and they were drinking together, and he was saying, hey, do you still want to be in my Lugosi movie? So, he's homeless. He's he's got nothing, and he's still talking about this Lugosi movie he wants to make. So, uh, yeah, he probably did consider himself a failure a lot of the time, but there was also this side to him that was incredibly tenacious and that just would not take no for an answer.
You know, there's something profoundly human about his persistence. I mean, he made movies even when he had no money,
Hmm.
had no sets actually.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I mean, it was, and the stars. I mean, it was the same people in every movie. I mean, it was Bela Lugosi, Tor Johnson, um, his girlfriend. But Vampire, I gotta ask you about Vampira. How did uh, how did he feel about getting Vampira in the movie?
Oh, I think he was thrilled. Vampira is exactly the kind of celebrity who would flourish in an Ed Wood movie. And he pursued her. He definitely courted her because I mean, for those who don't know, Vampira, real name Mila Nurmi, she was kind of the first horror hostess. I mean, years before Elvira. Elvira kind of stole her act, basically. But
Yeah.
in local television in Los Angeles, Vampiro was a kind of local novelty celebrity because late night on Saturday night, she would host, the horror movies and she would do little skits in the interstitials. And she was famous enough that she got a Life magazine pictorial. I think she was being pursued by major studios to maybe do a movie.
Hmm.
It was a bit of a 15 minutes of fame situation, unfortunately. So by the time of Plan 9 from Outer Space, he was able to get a hold of her. um, uh, it's an amazing thing. I was talking to Dana Gould recently, who was friendly with Vampira in her later years. He was kind of her, I think, as he said, her consigliere to reality. And he said that when she would talk about Ed Wood, she would say things like, "It was 2 days." You know, it was 2 days of my life. And Plan 9 from Outer Space ended up becoming the defining thing of her life. It's amazing.
Yeah, because she got her career almost ended overnight with Confidential magazine,
Hmm.
and
Oh yeah, because she was friendly with James Dean,
right.
and I think they may have had a falling out. But yeah, she was in Confidential magazine with this very lurid, salacious cover story of like, I spoke to James Dean's ghost or something goofy like that. I Based on what I've read, I don't think she ever fully recovered from James Dean. I think she didn't fully recover from having known him, having been rejected by him, and then yeah, having had that falling out. Because I mean, especially in the 50s, after James Dean's death, I can't imagine the sort of mail she was getting, the sort of people who were pursuing her. I think it was very, very hard on her. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after spending so much time in Ed Wood's world, well, what do you personally admire most about him?
I think I admire the tenacity more than anything. I admire that he remained an artist. It's crazy when you read some of the accounts of him making his porno movies in the 60s and 70s. There's one movie in particular called Necromania, which is a sort of spooky haunted house porno film. And he was working at this company that made pulp fiction. Basically, he wrote paperback novels for them, and they said, we're branching out into filmmaking. And he said, oh, I'll direct it, what do you want? I'll do anything. He makes Necromania. He says to, when he's hiring people, he says, you're going to watch a director at work this weekend. And he really carried himself on the set like he was Orson Welles. And I mean, I love that. How can you not love that?
Yeah.
And you watch Necromania, the guy who made Plan 9 from Outer Space made that movie. He's he's really putting himself in that film, and I think that's incredibly powerful.
Well, Will Sloan's book is called Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. It's a thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly moving exploration of how one man's cinematic chaos, for want of a better word, became in its own way a kind of beauty. Will, thank you so much for joining me on Lights Camera Author today.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And I want to thank everybody for viewing in on Lights Camera Author. If you like it, please subscribe, click the bell, and we will watch you next time. I'm Jim Juno, so until next time, keep watching closely because sometimes the worst movies tell us the best stories.